Good morning and welcome to The VUU. I hope you're having a good morning no matter what the weather is where you are. I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford and I am in Austin, Texas. Today we're going to be talking about death with dignity. But first I'm going to have our regulars introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what's going on in your town.
Hi, this is Bob LaValle calling from Buffalo, New York, where we are in the midst of kind of the deep, darkest part of winter, and we're all just trying to hang in there.
Hi everybody, this is Patrice Curtis. I'm in Washington, D.C., and we just had a lovely little snowfall the last couple of hours, and just before I came on I was able to go dig out the walkway, so feeling pretty good right now.
And hi, I'm Tom Shade in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where today we have light snow. We have not had much snow so far this year, certainly not like everybody else, and it is, but it's been very cold, you know, in the single digits almost every day. So the little dogs don't like to go out, and neither do I.
I've noticed that my friends and colleagues in the colder climes, any sense of humor about this is gone now. This is kind of like the way I was about the heat in September. You know, it's just, y'all have all gotten to that feeling of it's never going to change. This is our reality for the rest.
There's no more jokes left. We've gone through all of them.
I think it's spilling over onto the internet. I think people are like the vitriol level is raising up on the internet because people are just lost it. Man, they just any sense of good humor.
Getting pretty irritable. Let me have our guests introduce themselves. We're not going to get into our topic yet, but we'd like everyone to know who's joining us today.
Good morning. My name is Eric Kaminetzky. I serve a congregation in Edmonds, Washington, and I'm speaking to you from just north of Seattle. Happy to be with you. We have sort of gray, rainy weather, which is the standard in Seattle from about October through March.
Hi, I'm Alexa Fraser, and I'm speaking to you from just outside of the D.C. area, and I'm a seminarian at Star King.
Welcome, welcome. So what all is going on in the news in y'all's areas? I'm here in Austin, and I don't know if, I wasn't on the show last week, I don't know if Meg broke in, because I was texting her during the show and going, we may have marriage equality in Texas, because there was one lesbian couple that last Thursday was able to get married, and so all of it, and in the area that I'm in, Travis County, and all of us were, you know, all the clergy across the denominations, you know, were going, is this it? Is this the day? Do we get to and no, it was such a roller coaster day. By the end of the day, you know, the Texas Supreme Court had basically said, you know, no marriage for you and your little dog too, you know, just they put a halt on everything, and they're trying to, or at least our Attorney General is trying to void the one marriage that did happen. But it was a little crack of light. It was a little crack of light. What about for y'all? What's going on?
Well, in Buffalo, I think, not to endlessly talk about the weather, but the real impacts are starting to play out. That we've had 70 water main breaks in Buffalo since in greater Buffalo since Friday, in a week. So there's just chaos happening, and these poor, you know, public works crews are scrambling to try and keep up. But on a positive note, something to look forward to. Just today, tickets for the Book of Mormon went on sale at the local theater. So we're all stocking up on things.
You gotta grab that joy where you can.
Yeah. In earnest, though, there's a small but mighty group of Meadville seminarians who are going down to Selma, who are really excited about joining the many UUs who are heading down there. So that is a really exciting thing.
That's right. That's the big news. And two of our folks, right, are going. Patrice and Tom, y'all are both going. When do you leave?
Go ahead, Patrice.
I'm leaving on Wednesday, I think it is, to go down. I think the events begin Thursday morning and go through, well, they go through Sunday as far as the UUA goes, culminating with a worship service after we walk across Pettus Bridge. But it turns out that a couple of the congregations down there have events going on all the week after that as well. So, yeah, I wish that, I wish I had enough time to be able to stay for a couple of weeks, because there's some concerts going on, and some folks speaking even after the UEA finishes their piece. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. Hoping to make some really wonderful connections with other congregations and folks that are involved in voting rights in their particular state. We stay committed to working with North Carolina and the voting rights issues down there. So I think it's going to be a very full, 4 or 5 days. And I think personally for me, I think it's going to be both inspirational and probably I'll experience a little bit of heartbreak too, looking back at the history. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm not sure exactly when I'm going down there. I'm driving down and driving back, so I have a little more flexibility. And so I have to see what the schedule's like and decide from there. So.
Tom, how long of a drive is that?
It's a 10-hour drive.
It's
That's not bad. No. I can do that in a day.
You could have caught the train. You hear about the Selma train?
There was a train going from.
Oh yeah, there's a UU Selma train making stops and.
Oh.
Yeah.
This train is bound for glory.
Do you mean literally a train, Patrice?
I'm sorry?
Like an Amtrak train, you mean?
Yeah, it's an Amtrak train, but it's called. Where did I see it? I think I saw it on the UU Living Legacy org page, which is talking about everything Selma. And there is a train, and they're calling, I don't know, Selma Bound or something like that. And
going through Chicago or something?
I don't know where it starts. It actually might not start. It may start in New York or DC or somewhere, or Boston.
It starts in Boston. It
Is it in
starts in Boston, and we were going to get on in DC, had to cancel those plans. But it's a pretty long trip from Boston all the way down. So people were getting off the train and getting right onto buses to go to Montgomery, as I recall. And so that's going to be a big 24 hours there.
I'll be cheering a bunch of you who are going down there on. I got to go down on the Living Legacy tour to Selma a couple of years ago. We have some folks in our congregation who will be there, and I'm very excited to watch from a distance. So go, go, go.
Yeah, I also did it a few years ago, that Legacy trip. It's amazing. And Lena Gardner will be going from CLF, and Lena is one of the main faith leaders here in Black Lives Matter. So the Unity Church in St. Paul has done this amazing organizing with the black clergy in St. Paul to come too, so that when they learn those history lessons, they can bring them back together and figure out how to take action. Now they've got, I don't know, like 60 or 70 people going from Unity. I saw online that Nancy McDonald Ladd posted that River Road also has 50 or 60 people going. So It's going to be quite a scene. It's going to be quite a scene. I'm too embroiled in the present here, but I think it's going to be prophetic. I'm really delighted that it's got so much attention, and I'm delighted that my camera's kind of working. My picture is still really wide, but my head is squished as it's been.
Back to Bob's question of a couple of minutes ago. I'm up here in Washington State, where we got marriage equality a couple of years ago, and we just got marijuana legalization. So those things are, becoming absorbed by much of the culture. One of our big issues now is folks who are trying to resist Washington becoming the West Coast export center for oil trains from Canada. So we have a lot of folks working on that. We have big immigration issues, detention center issues. So there's, in the midst of at least this little liberal spot of Greater Seattle, where all the votes you need to get elected can be seen from the top of the Space Needle, we have plenty of issues.
And
I did want to raise up that I was really happy to see the veto of the Keystone XL pipeline. I think a couple of years ago, I was actually going to go on a walk. There was a walk that was supposed to go from Canada all the way down to where it was going to end, and was planning to sign up for that, and it got canceled. But I was really happy to see that. And pot is now legal in D.C.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can have a couple ounces.
Wait,
I mean, the rules are the rules are pretty. I don't know. I really haven't looked at it. I do know a colleague that sent out a Facebook message saying, "Look, I don't have enough money to bail you all out, so please go read the rules about exactly what you can have and what you can't have. I have a bone, but you can't have a this, or you can have a that, and you can't have that." Anyway, I don't know, but you can have 2 ounces, which
wait, Patrice, how did that happen? Because it passed.
How did that happen exactly, right?
The Congress vetoed it, so how did it get through again?
I have no idea, because I have to say that I really did not follow. All I know is that yesterday, I think it became legal yesterday. I think yesterday was the day.
So it's
maybe
actually
the day before.
It's kind of an interesting story, Meg. The D.C. Council's position is that it was passed before the congressional refusal to fund anything. And so it doesn't, no more money needed to be spent to enact it. However, only half of the bill was passed. The part that was supposed to generate revenue by putting taxes and structures for sale and so forth cannot now be enacted, because so they're in this sort of yes and no and position that is exactly where Congress probably would rather not be.
But you can own up to 6 plants. You can cultivate up to 6 plants personally.
Is it 6?
So
I thought it was 3.
You don't need to buy any.
I thought it was only 3.
You guys know an amazing and somewhat disturbing amount of detail about this.
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, here they quote legalized pot, but poor people still can't grow it or get it. You have to go through pharmaceutical companies for this medical marijuana. So I was really upset about that. I feel like, yeah, plant it in your garden. It's, take away all the economics tied to it. That's where the crime comes in. So I was quite upset about where they left it off here. I'm delighted to hear you can grow 3 or 6 plants. That's all you need. That should keep you happy.
So if you live in D.C. and you suddenly become very popular with your friends and family, ...
Oh, my goodness. Well, I have one other
story. Legalize absinthe.
And that is this little button here, the little Black Lives Matter button that I'm wearing. Oh, you have
I was gonna ask about that, Tom.
Well, Gail Geisenhainer, our minister here at the VUU congregation of Ann Arbor, brought in a big chalice, literally with hundreds of these buttons, hundreds. And she gave them to all of us. And she said we should all wear them for a week. And then there'll be discussions about what that experience is like, and who you met and who you talked to as a result of wearing that button. And so hundreds of UUs are out in Ann Arbor these days wearing these buttons. And I took a handful, so I have a pocket full to give away when people...
Have you gotten into any conversations from having it that you wouldn't have had?
Well, if I went out of the house...
Back to the weather.
We're going to have to send a rescue team in to get...
If I went out of the house, and the people at the grocery store where I go all the time are, pretty, blasé about me at this point because they see me every day, and the people at the gym. But other than that, I haven't been anywhere in about 2 days. So we'll see what happens as the week progresses.
I have a friend who put on the back of her vest she's a white woman, big Black Lives Matter thing, and the police stopped her. And they said, "Oh, can we take a picture with that?" And she thought, well, this could be okay. And then one of them said, "Ha ha ha, I'm going to make one that says White Lives Matter." And all of a sudden, this white woman felt like, ah! And they went on their way. But
well, and that's part of the experiment. We're doing it here at Live Oak too, because of something that was discussed on The View a few weeks ago. I know
Margaret Beard started this.
Yes, Hank is also doing it at his church. And so this Sunday, we're going to be talking about what it has been like. I had a really interesting experience last week because I was at the Capitol for a marriage equality rally. And so first of all, I and some congregants were taking the Metro rail. All of us are wearing our buttons, and this big, beefy, white guy wearing a Boston shirt, but telling us that he was from New York. A little suspicious, I know. Was asking about it and wanting to know where he could get one. So our stereotypes, are not always true the other way, too. And then I will tell you, when I was walking through the Capitol Rotunda, they happened to be having some kind of police thing going on, constable thing. And so as I was walking through all these constables, I realized that I was very, very aware of this little button. Nothing was said to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've thought about it with a bumper sticker. I saw some people are handing those out, and I've thought, do I really want to be stopped by the cops all the time? I mean, it does just make you aware how much privilege, if you're white, you just presume, So, I mean, I'm going to do a bumper sticker because that's a really stupid thought to have. But there you have it.
Oh, no, it's not. Actually, when you said that, Meg, I was like, oh, welcome to the lives of my brothers.
Exactly. I mean, in a really small way, yeah, which is, I think, why it's a profound thing to do, because some people can't say, ooh, I'm taking that off here.
Right.
So, yeah.
I must admit,
yeah, go ahead.
When we did the die-in for Congress in January 21st, as we got ready to actually die, there was one person who had all of our signs, and as we approached the cashier's area where we were going to lie down, he just quickly handed them out, and they were all face down, right? So it was completely random who got what. And I ended up getting the sign that said Black Lives Matter. And it's a really interesting process to go through, to be carrying a sign that basically says, I myself matter. It somehow doesn't feel quite as powerful, right, as to have someone else who is not black carrying that sign. I mean, it's just a weird thing to wrap my mind around. And I thought it was so that there's a photo now on the UUA homepage of the UU ministers that participated in that. We're all standing there, and there I am with my Black Lives Matter sign, and my wife asked me, so what do you think about that? And I was like, well, it was completely 100% random that I ended up with it. I mean, it's just kind of weird, but it almost would have politically more power, right? And somebody else was carrying it. And I also found that when I went to a march,
different kind of power. I don't know that it's more, but it's different.
Different, yeah. When I went to a march, there was a black TV crew there, and they turned to me and they said, we really want to interview somebody who's not black. Because, I was like, yeah, no, I totally get it. It was really, it's just interesting. It's another facet of this whole thing that we're all trying to wrap our minds around and figure out.
Yeah, I think that there's this whole side effect that is interesting to watch of figuring out allyship that has really, kind of come into focus through the Black Lives Matter rallies and the learning that's being done and the figuring out, okay, what's effective, what's not effective.
Okay, this could go on. There's so much to say here, but I really want to get to our topic for today because there's so much to say there too. This conversation is one we'll be having week after week, I'm happy to say. But this week we also have special guests to talk about a matter that I've noticed on the CLF pages, a lot of people saying, I'm going to go to that one for sure, because I know a lot of people, especially older people, are really thinking about these issues about death with dignity. And we, as Joanna said, have two guests, one of whom, Eric, lives in a place where death with dignity is the law, and we're really interested to hear how that affects your ministry and what's going on with that. And Alexa, you're working on some of the legislation related to this. So I'm really excited to hear from both of you. Could we start with Eric and just say, Eric, you haven't been in Washington all that long, right? And you came from a place where there was not the legislation that gave people the right to choose about the end of their lives. What do you see that's different from being where you are now?
Moving to a state where death with dignity is the law does not mean that it is universally available. So I've seen sort of the joys and sorrows of how legislation and even rights get implemented. I was just with a hospice patient who went through the process of getting access to the medication to end their lives, and ultimately chose not to use the medication and died a natural death, but had that opportunity to experience the control. That if they got to a place where they were not comfortable with their pain management, if they got to a place where they were really complete enough with their life that they did not want to wake up for another day and be in whatever situation they're in, they can make that choice. I have an experience about 2 years ago of having my uncle, another Unitarian Universalist, in his early 90s wind up in a hospice that is under the auspices of the Catholic healthcare system. And going to visit with him, he ended his days with fantastic care, but he confided in me that he was afraid to ask for too much help or to complain too much about his pain because he was concerned about getting thrown out of there. Now, I don't think that they were threatening to throw him out, but I can tell you that when I asked the social worker at that Catholic-controlled hospice about death with dignity, she went absolutely ashen and said, if you want to talk about that, I need to have you talk to someone else and your uncle would not be able to stay here. So my family member in hospice, who ultimately died in that hospice, was concerned that he was going to be too big a burden to hospice people to stay in the hospice.
That's amazing. So all those issues about hospital mergers and Catholics and all of those around abortion, I hadn't even ever put that together. Of course they would play in here. Wow.
So that's a live issue here in the place. You know, we can do in-home hospice care. We can do some in-hospital hospice care, but there are plenty of healthcare systems in the state of Washington that are strategically controlled by the Catholic healthcare bureaucracy because they are unable to muster the votes to upend the laws in Washington state with which they don't agree. So you have laws on the books that are not implementable in wide swaths of our state. That's probably enough of an introduction.
Wow, thank you. Alexa, where do you, I mean, you listen to that, I'm sure you aren't surprised at all as I am to hear that story. Can you talk about some of the legislative and policy changing work that you're doing?
At this point, there are 5 states that have death with dignity laws in place, either through the legislative arena or through court decisions, and Washington was the second. Maryland does not, and the effort that I'm most engaged in at this point is trying to pass that legislation here. As you may know, Brittany Menard was a 29-year-old woman with a terrible prognosis with brain cancer, and she very publicly and openly shared her process of deciding on the kind of death that she wanted and what she viewed as the most preferable death within a difficult, terribly difficult prognosis. And her sharing about that and all of the public attention has brought this conversation is much more common, much more open now than it was 6 months or a year ago, and As a result, this bill is now, or this type of legislation is being put forward in something on the order of 18 states as we speak.
And are the Catholics the major opposition in those 18 states? Does that help us legislatively?
I think there are really two voices of dissent. One is definitely Catholics who tend to be pretty well organized and have serious concerns. My answer to them is, this is an individual decision. Make the law, don't use it if that doesn't suit you. That is your perfect sweet spot for implementing your religious beliefs. But I'm not always being asked. The second population that is most concerned is the disabled community. And there is a very active group that is named Not Dead Yet, that has activists in many states, and they often will testify, saying that they feel that there's a potential slippery slope and that their lives are being devalued and that this could turn into something that they don't want. And my response,
I'm much more familiar with. So yeah, what do you say to them? I mean, that's a reasonable point.
I've actually spoken with a local UU who's disabled about this, and what she said totally touched my heart. She was when her mother was pregnant, she was told that that fetus that turned into my friend would have spina bifida, and the mother was told to strongly urge to abort, and so this woman's life was essentially threatened from before birth. And my heart just goes out to her with a life trajectory that has been much more challenging, much more difficult. And I need to and want to give my heart and respect to somebody who's lived under that threat and shadow. And I will also say that the laws that are being proposed are actually irrelevant to them, because all of the laws that have been passed or that are in discussion require a terminal diagnosis with a 6-month or less span of time to live. So that does not actually qualify anybody in the broadly disabled community. Second, you have to be asking in writing. You have to go through your doctor. Your doctor has to determine that this is that you're actually two doctors who know you have to determine that this is not a depression-oriented thing, but that it is a free will, personal choice. Then you have to fill the prescription. Then you have to decide to use it. So while my heart is really full with what the disabled community has been through and why they have these fears, there are no examples of abuse out of the 17 years of implementation in Oregon. And I just think it's ungrounded fear, is my sense.
A third voice that I have become familiar with through this conversation came to me in particular from a Unitarian Universalist hospice chaplain who practiced through the yawning era of the HIV and AIDS crisis in the early days. And that person expressed a concern that insurance interests could see death with dignity as a potential lever to cut down on the costs of keeping people marginally alive who insurance companies would really rather not pay to keep alive. I'd also like to backtrack a little bit and be careful to say that it is not all Catholics who oppose this. Mm-hmm. It's, in particular, in my experience in Washington State, the Catholic healthcare bureaucracy, which takes orders from the Catholic bureaucracy. There are plenty of Catholics who are on many different sides of this issue. So I would not paint with too broad a brush, with the exception of the Catholic healthcare bureaucracy.
Well, the Catholic healthcare bureaucracy is taking its marching orders from the Vatican, who ruled about the merger. So that, I mean, I know this from the re-pro-choice side of it. So that hospitals that merge with a Catholic hospital are forced to follow the Catholic social teachings. So that's where the hierarchy comes in, but it certainly isn't about any more than it is about birth control or anything else about what all Catholics think. Thanks for clarifying that, Eric. That's really true. Sorry, Alexa.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to second that clarification and say that in my meetings with legislators here in Maryland, several have, I guess I've sort of come to learn that when somebody says, yes, that's a controversial issue, that's a sign that this conversation is going to go a hard way. But that said, I try to respond why it's not controversial given the 17 years of history in Oregon, given all of these safeguards, given all of the data that have been collected in Oregon and other states on the fact that there just haven't been abuses. But one of the ways that conversation that starts out, oh, this is a controversial issue, can go is for somebody to say, personally, I really agree. And my faith teaches me something else. What do you, as a seminarian, have to say to me about that? What do you, as not exactly a religious leader, but a religious leader in training, have to say about that? And my answer is that not every religion at all believes that there's some sort of a spiritual or healing process associated with end-of-life suffering. And that is something that should not be taken as a given if it was what was taught to you. And that there is so much room here for every person to decide, unfortunately, with the exception, Eric, of somebody in your uncle's situation. But, in theory, there should be a range all the way from, doctor, give me everything you've got, to no heroic measures, to actually, if I get something that an antibiotic would fix, I don't want the antibiotic. I don't even want that, to further and further down hospice care. There are just a lot of nuanced steps. And so part of what I want to promote is really thoughtful conversations on this matter. Conversations between friends who are exploring what they want for themselves, possibly between clergy and congregants, but then a subsequent conversation, which would be focused between the members of a household, the people who have to have each other's back. It doesn't matter what I want for my husband. What matters is what he wants. And I've got to really, really understand that to ensure that I advocate for him.
Alexa, I think you're absolutely right. And I wonder what both you and Eric think about, what is the how of having those conversations? Because really, I don't want to talk about my own mortality, nor my elderly father's. And so, so my dad and I are watching the game, and I'm like, hey, Dad, how do you want to die?
Well, I mean, the punchline is you may wind up having that conversation whether you like it or not. The question is, do you have the conversation at a time when your father is in a position to actually pay attention? My father just passed this last November, 91 years old, 91, really pretty good years, 6 weeks that sucked, 2 years of hospice, 2 hours of hospice, 6 weeks back and forth between hospital and rehab for various reasons, 2 hours of hospice. But what we found when we dug through the bank box was a really pretty sophisticated healthcare document. And my father lived his life as an academic, a teaching physician, an MD. And there was a little thing tucked into his healthcare directive that said, if I am unconscious, I do not want to receive antibiotics. And that was just a fairly sophisticated thing. If I'm not awake and I've got an infection, for God's sake, let me die of the infection. I'm asleep. Who cares?
Right.
So how do those of us in elder care open this conversation?
So I'll tell you what I think, and I think that when there are opportunities for conversation, it should be brought up rather than turned away from. And so, it's a little bit like sex ed and what we've done with OWL. That's not a conversation. That's a context of conversation and education. So somebody's friend dies, and you can say, well, how does that relate to the death you want? And actually, there's a third flavor of conversation that I'd like to bring up, which I think, at least towards the end of life, as opposed to that, those kind of ongoing brief dialogues that my father and I had regularly, and more on that later. But another is informational conversations between doctors and patients. There's a very good book named The Conversation, which I think only maybe focuses on one of these, and that's the one between the doctor and the patient. I think it's on the New York Times bestseller list right now. And the premise of that is that people need to see a video, or they need to go. People at the end of their lives need to know what they're deciding. And a video of what a cardiac resuscitation looks like, a video of what final days would look like with a breathing tube. All of those things. We have some kind of TV image, and it isn't really that way. So there are cascades of conversations.
Another opening. Go ahead, Joanna.
On the political side, are there organized attempts to get out the information about what this is and isn't, to try to alleviate the fears? Are there websites, or are people having like town halls?
Yeah.
So there's and Choices is one of the organizations that does almost nationwide advocacy, and I can. Probably it's literally compassionandchoices.org. They have a really open-hearted and sophisticated approach to all of this stuff. Very informational. I think it's great. Please go ahead, Alexa.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go with this too. It's a terrific organization. They offer a wide range of services, including for those who are nearing the time of their death at living in a state where this law is not passed. They will provide assistance, informational assistance on how somebody might end their days. They do lobbying for this work. We have staff members here in Maryland that were provided by them, and clearly they are a real voice of reason, and UU's helped form them.
I was going to ask theologically how you respond to the people who say, God should decide life and death. Eric, have you talked theology with people about this as you've processed it with people, or Alexa, either one of you?
If someone is embracing the idea that God should decide, I will support them in that. For their own individual choice, of course.
No, I mean
most of the people
that politically, right? I've heard that
politically
it shouldn't be legal.
It's again, my support is for the individual to make their choice. Not unlike how Alexa laid out. The sweet spot is having choice and being able to make it for yourself. Not imposing your choice on someone else, not having someone else impose their choice on you. I can't tell you that I get any traction with that argument, but arguing theology with people, it's like arguing about the weather.
Meg, one of my projects at school right now at Star King is to interview a lot of ministers, hospice workers, people on both sides of this issue, and see if I can create something that at least works for me as a theology of death with dignity. So that's something that is in process for me. But I think one way to frame this is that it is in almost all cases, people, first off, you can't get the medicine the prescription unless you've got officially 6 months to live. And probably people being people and loving life as we do, we are going to go for every day that we can. So maybe we're talking about days of shortening, days of just a short period of time. It's not a matter of killing yourself when you were going to be alive. It is simply a matter of taking charge of what exactly you have to suffer towards the end. I don't know, is that theology or just well wishes for my fellow human beings?
Is there a difference? I'm always of two minds about this question. Partly it is theological. I think one of the things that I think we've learned is that the systemic power imbalances in our society distort everything that we look at, and we have to look at everything through the lens of the power imbalances in our society, and that often when we work with something as a right, a choice, we're working at people we know, a kind of middle-class, educated, fairly powerful and autonomous group of people making choices for themselves. How does this work, and what's the experience in Oregon, and how does this work when you start dealing with really vulnerable populations, poor elderly people who don't have good health care, don't have good choices, aren't equipped to handle their insurance company, are often
have language barriers,
all these kinds of things. You know, as a society, we're not able to prevent physical and sexual abuse in elder care, and even though we all know that it's wrong. So how does this work into that kind of environment? What's the experience with that? You say there's been no abuse in Oregon. I'd like to hear about that. The kind of safeguards you're talking about, seem to be at a higher level of education and competency in working with the healthcare system. That's the kind of things I think about when I think about this.
One of the concerns that I have for populations that are not middle-class educated advocates in their own right is the sort of reflexive default to spending money that isn't there on the end of life. We see all the stories that the last couple of weeks of life are the most expensive. Yes. That doesn't change across class. It's just the most expensive. So finding ways to educate people so that, again, so that they can experience some control, so that they don't lease their autonomy to organizations and players that may not have their best interest or their family's best interest in mind. I don't think we're anywhere near that, but I think that should ultimately be one of the goals.
I think you're certainly asking profound and important questions. Maybe it's useful to give a little bit of a sense of the scale in Oregon. We're talking about something on the order of 200 requests for prescriptions a year. So it's an option, it's available, and it is far from a stampede. And then not all of those are used. Roughly 2/3 are used, and a third are held in hand as a relief valve, a safety net.
Control.
Yes.
Control.
Yes. Agency.
Yeah.
You're going back to one of Meg's earlier questions. Who is against this? There certainly is a feeling in some minority communities, most notably in our area, the African American community, that heck, we just got medical care benefits. What are you doing here? And I want to say that once again, it's all about choice. But I'd just like to tell a story from my childhood. So I was raised in a two-person family. My father and I were the only two people in my family. And we had a housekeeper, a beloved housekeeper named Elizabeth, who kept things going since it was just the two of us. And when she was diagnosed with cancer, she wrote my father a letter, and we're talking about 1974. She was African American. She was not well educated. She was a woman of tremendous dignity and personal strength, and really an important feature in my childhood. Anyway, she wrote my dad, and she said, what can I do to ensure that I don't die in horrible pain? And it was before palliative care was as common as it is now. And he wrote her back and he said, if your doctor is as wise as you are, he will appreciate the conversation. And he will do something so that your end days are not as horrible as you fear. And if he won't have that conversation with you, change doctors. So while we can be concerned, and I think appropriately so, about a range of choices for all citizens, whatever their education or economic background or insurance status, whatever their wealth is, I'll just say that she knew what she wanted and she was working towards it all those years ago. And my dad saved that in the same file that he had all of his bank account stuff, so that when he died, and he did take his life, he did have advanced Parkinson's, and he did decide that enough was enough. He put that in the folder with the bank stuff so that I would see it and know that his position was long unchanged and standing.
I think one part that often gets overlooked in this discussion politically, when people are, sort of against it, and they have this idea that it's going to be sort of a, something willy-nilly that people choose to do, is someone who is accompanied, someone who was considering this, and their family. There is really a lot of there's a lot of spiritual depth to deciding, or not deciding how much, when, whether, death with dignity is right. And a lot of that is hidden, right? I mean, a lot of that is not in the public sphere. People don't talk about, their conversations with their God, or their spiritual conversations, and how hard it is with their family when they have close family members who are not supportive, right? Who are saying, who are feeling as if that person is denying them something, right? And I have found it to be a very rich coming together, though, of those who are living together, no matter where the conversation ends up going, no matter what the decision is made. That process is something that folks hold on to. It's another exploration of living together with family members that is not something that is necessarily something that everyone has the opportunity to experience. And so there is that richness that happens in that process. I know for myself, I have, it is a struggle. Someone was talking about how do you have these conversations, with my parents. It's really kind of tough. And I'm someone who loves life, but may have less fear of death, it seems, than some folks. When I was 25, I, stupidly wrote my parents, because I was going into a dangerous country, and said, oh, by the way, if I die, I want to be cremated, not thinking anything else, about their response maybe to that.
Young adulthood.
Yeah, exactly, young adulthood, boy. And let me tell you,
if I'm eaten by
that
wolves.
comes up from time to time. My mother particularly likes to remind me of that. But I think that theologically, it's always been very clear to me that, for a Unitarian from Unitarian Universalist perspective, that I see it obviously not only as the worth and dignity, right, of every person, but also part of a spiritual journey. That's supporting, and that encouragement to spiritual path or exploration. And then the final thing is that Slate. I just read an article this morning in Slate where a physician is talking about the 3 things that a physician can do for someone, regardless of the death with dignity. The things that a physician can do. Just as your dad got that letter, said, there are things that physicians can do. It's not nearly as good as being able to choose.
Yeah.
But for folks who are not in a state like that, there is some possibility.
Right. I'd really like to second the interpersonal value of those conversations. My father just very briefly was 90, had very advanced Parkinson's, and his terror was that he would fall and end up in a nursing home, and then he would lose his right to choose, which he'd advocated for all of his adult life. So he did let me know that was his plan. That was not a surprise, and then he did take what he hoped would be a peaceful overdose of Percocet, and he woke up from that. And then he tried to slit his wrists, and that also did not work because with the advanced Parkinson's, his hands were always moving. At that point, he'd been out of touch for too long. My husband and I went to visit him, and he asked us to help him get some food and get tidied up a little bit. And then he asked us to leave, and it was pretty darn clear to me that his next step was going to be to shoot himself. There was nothing I could do but love him and leave and know that there would be a police investigation and know that he was living within his values, within the options that he had. And so many people since then have said to me, "Oh, it's so horrible that he shot himself." And I want to say back, yes, it is, but kind of from a different angle than you're taking it. And it's because of those conversations and the understanding that I had for his preference, whatever my preference would be. I mean, I'm not going to have a gun in my house. But the point is that because of those conversations, I was not left, as I could so easily have been, flat on the ground from this play out. Because I knew that as bad as getting to chance 3 was, he didn't end up having to go into a nursing home and have his life play out in a way that was plan 26. That was so much what he didn't want to do. So I advocate for conversations, and I advocate for the law to change.
Right. So this is very personal for you, I would assume, because you don't want other families to have to go through it this way.
Exactly. Exactly.
Are there any organizations, I'm thinking of like AARP, other senior groups that have come out in favor of these type of things?
It is my understanding, but this is hearsay, that Kaiser, California has actually said something positive. I think their position is difficult because of some of the conversations that we've already had about not wanting it to sound like limiting a medical cost thing. But by and large, this is a state-level issue. It is people come out for it on a state-by-state basis. I don't know if you or the other listeners know about Diane Rehm. Diane Rehm's husband died also of Parkinson's. I mean, I say my dad died of Parkinson's. That's what I say. Her husband similarly died of Parkinson's. He withheld food and drink for the last 10 days of his life. Diane Rehm has done a number of shows on this. I was actually on one with her, and she's become a very strong advocate. So there are advocates, and Compassion and Choice has a wonderful magazine that has interviews with people on this, but not so much organizational support.
I just want to lift up the Unitarian Universalists all over the place who have been part of this history, not only in changing the laws. I think of Ralph Miro out in Oregon when that was done, but also some of the really courageous doctors and ministers who, for legal reasons, can't be named, who have helped people to go peacefully. And I want to lift up someone I'm sure you've run into there in Maryland, Dr. Larry Egbert, who is a retired anesthesiologist, has helped people illegally and has faced trial for that. And, you know, I think, thank you for your personal story. I think that testimony makes it clear why this is so important. My own mother quit eating and drinking for she lasted 3 weeks without eating and drinking, which was amazing to all of us, but she wanted to go her way, and that gave me great peace that she got to make that choice. And my father was terrified when she died, and I said to him, I'm worried that you're going to commit suicide because you don't want to have a stroke. And he said, well, Mom, your mom and I had a commitment to each other that if we had strokes, we wouldn't call 911. My mother had a stroke, and my father did call 911, by the way. But I said to him, I promise you if it comes to that, I'll be there for you. And it didn't come to that, but I would have. And I know so many people, family members and doctors and ministers who are helping people to find peace and to bring it above board to have conversations, I think would just be a blessing for all of us. Eric?
Alexa told a really poignant and personal story. Meg, you lifted up Unitarian Universalists. In 1988, we did have a general resolution at the General Assembly about the right to die with dignity. So Unitarian Universalists have been on this case for a long time, and I think one of the punchlines of having death with dignity legislation enacted where the rights are actually available is that families like Alexa's don't have to be absent from their loved ones when they choose to end their lives for fear that they're going to be dragged through legal nonsense that they need not be dragged through. Families can be together. Families can make choices. Families can hold hands. My mother was able to hold my father's hand in hospice, and she knew that he had passed because she said, oh, I think his hand has gotten cold.
Yeah.
That's much more the way I want all of us to have options for those of us who will have options.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have loved to be there, to not have my son have any lingering. I have a 15-year-old now. He was 14 when his beloved grandfather, who was really the third most important adult in his life, died. You know, to not have any lingering questions. Is that suicide? Isn't that suicide? What did he give up? I remember him asking, did he give up? And if there could have been more open conversations, that would have been better. If we could have been present, that would have been better.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time. One question we didn't get to is this young woman who so publicly took her life in Oregon. I mean, you know, chose her own ending so publicly. 2 People magazine features on it, very positive, and I felt the tide turning when I read those stories in People magazine. It was not Terry Schiavo again. We were not back into that story. And I just wonder, as we go, Alexa, I'll give you the final word here. Do you see energy moving on this?
I do see energy moving, and the thing that I'd like to add, you know, it was a multi-year battle for same-gender marriage here in Maryland, and similarly for transgender person rights, and so it may be for this, although I hope not. But if you want to learn more, please watch the movie How to Die in Oregon. It is a beautiful movie that juxtaposes, frankly, very painfully with my own father's death, but that I hold up as an option for others.
Thank you both for your testimony, as we say in the church.
And I believe that we somehow just lost our illustrious leader. So, final words from anyone?
Thank you
I would
very
just
much.
say that, go ahead, Bob.
No, just thank you.
I was going to say thank you to our guests, and also to encourage people to go to the New York Times. There is a columnist whose name's escaping me, who has a blog, who's really been exploring death and talking about this with loved ones. I believe her mother died, and it really sort of sparked her interest in how, you know, all the things that go around death and how we don't talk to each other about what we want and our hopes for end of life. And it's quite a rich blog with all kinds of resources and just thought pieces about it.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us for this episode of The VUU, and have a good week.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.